Hello and thank you for joining me again in the workshop. Today we're actually going to be on the computer and we're going to be looking at Google Sketchup and how I take the measurements that we took in the last episode and transfer them to a 3D CAD drawing. Now, I wouldn't be without the process of modelling in Sketchup and producing technical drawings from that model now that I've kind of mastered it and got to a point where I'm pretty quick with it, confident, and I know what I'm doing. So hopefully those of you that are a bit on the edge of whether you should learn and go down this route, this will sort of give you the push over the edge to try it. And equally, if you've been dabbling with Google SketchUp, then there should be some really good hints and tips within this video that will help you if you're looking to do similar sort of built-in furniture projects yourself. So I don't think anything else really needs saying. Let's go straight over to the computer and we'll start modelling these walls. Okay, so straight into the model. We're in a fresh template of SketchUp Pro. I'm using the plan view. It's the standard template in plan view just to keep it nice and simple. And before I do absolutely anything, just save the model. So save that program and that way it will always be backed up under that file name. So if we don't save it and it suddenly closes for whatever reason, there might not be a backup of the drawing that you're doing, but if you've got a saved file already, there'll always be a SketchUp backup, and it'll ask you the next time you open the program whether you want to load that backup that it had automatically created. So it can save you in the future if you remember to save it before you do absolutely anything. Then I'll just navigate on the standard views here, and I go into the top view, so the plan view. So I'm looking down onto my model. Then going over to the measurements that I took in the previous video, this is sort of the frontal view of the wardrobe. So all I'm interested in at the minute is the width measurement. So 1053 and 979 is the width measurement that I'm interested in. So looking down on the middle, I'm going to go 1053 and then from that line 979. And that gives me, zoom on that gives me the width of my wardrobe from them measurements I took in the last video. Then I'm just going to draw out the room based on the measurements I took, or a rough guess of what the room was looking like in real life, because all I'm really interested in is this section of wall here and the two walls that join onto it. So if I go back to my drawings, I've got the measurements here, and I've also got the measurements from this back wall to the front of the alcove on another drawing. So that was 705 millimeters. So from this back wall here to that front wall was 705. It's a 100mm wall. And then this one was about 2.5 meters, but not a necessary measurement. And then we had a fairly deep bay window in here. So I can just draw that out. I'm just basically creating a line drawing of the perimeter of that room. So that's the only bit that I really need to focus on. So I'm just going to go back behind them walls and connect them together. Like so. And then I've got a solid piece that I can extrude up and down, which will give me my walls. So I can extrude them up now, the height from my measurements. So going back to the drawing here, from the floor we had 1117, and then from that 1117 is 1442. So all I've got to do is pull that up, 1117, and then 1442, and I've got the height of my walls. And that measurement was to the bottom of the coving, and we had a 180mm coving on top as well. So that gives me the perimeter walls for where my wardrobe was sitting. I can extend that out because that was a solid wall with a door in here, but all we're really interested in is this bit here, because that's the bit that I'm going to be making the wardrobe for. This is all just decoration, so it looks good for the customer. So looking back at the video of where I measured up, you can see that there's quite a small wall here and then quite a long beveled reveal of where the window is. So I can just push and pull that model around and get that exactly as I need it to be. So I literally grab them walls there and make it exactly how it wants to look in the actual model itself. And the same thing with all this. So as long as you draw the rough outline on the floor in the right shape of what you want, you can then dimension that and get them right at a later stage to make it look right with the model or to the dimensions that you've taken in your plan. Now this section up here had a curved arch bit in the top of it, as you can see here, so I can put that in very, very quickly. If I just pull a line across here and push that down, press Option, it adds it as a positive. I can then delete all the internal lines from that. If you press K, it reveals all your internal lines. You want to keep your model clean of any sort of inside lines inside the solid parts of the model, and that's for a bit more advanced. We end up with solid tools and we need a solid piece rather than things with little lines in. So if I select all of that model and make it a group, that will stop me from interfering with that if I now draw on top of it. So if I draw a couple of lines here, they are completely separate from that group, or there's no way I can grab anything in that first group. So if I select all them lines there, normally it would select these bits here, but because they're in a separate group, it doesn't select it. If I explode that group so that it's all, nothing is drawn in a group, and I select like that, it selects all the lines within that area. So it's a really important drawing tool is to make sure that you use groups to separate your items. It makes drawing and altering anything later on really easy. So that is a rough outline of where the walls are. We can now go back to the detail from our laser measuring. So we positioned our laser here and cast it at this wall nice and square, and we can use their measurements now to do an accurate sort of drawing of this bit of the wall, so we can get an accurate model and take dimensions off that to make it from. So looking at our measurements, we had out of level top to the frame, so we've got 1442 on the left which we've drawn in and 1424 on the right. So on Sketchup here we can recreate our cross. So that was the height of the cross. Then the width of the cross was 1053 from the right. So just grabbing them points, and that should be 979. If you're looking for the dimension of what I'm measuring, it's down here in the bottom right corner. So if I click that tool and then measure to that corner, it shows you in the bottom right what the measurement is. So at that point there, that's where my laser crossed on the wall and what I've taken my measurements from. I can draw a little line in there, doesn't need to be too big, but that's my reference cross for all of my measurements. So the steps to get this far are: draw a rough outline of your walls on the floor, doesn't have to be an accurate measurements. You can then grab them and adjust them to the sizes that you need, and then make that a group, extrude it up to the height of the walls, make that a group, and then we can start modelling. So we've just drawn that reference cross there. We can make that a group in itself so that nothing can interfere with that as well. And then I like to start using tags at this point, and I'll add a tag in and call that reference cross. And that's over here. And then in your entity info, when you select, so if I select that reference cross there, and entity info needs to be selected as well, you can tag that. Yeah, we're off the screen here. You can then give that the tag of reference cross that we've just named here. And what that allows you to do is when you're doing screenshots or anything for a customer to see, you can just untick that and then you don't see it. It's kind of like a layer, so that cross is now drawn on a layer that is called reference cross, so I can choose whether I want to see that or not. I can do the same thing for them walls. So if I select all the walls, create a tag called walls, and then call that and then tag it in the entity info. And when I select the walls, they disappear. I can see the reference cross if I want, or the walls. So I like to do this with everything that I make a group of. I'll give it a tag, and then I'll untag them all towards the end of the modelling process and make sure that nothing is visible on the screen, and if it is, then you can assign it a tag. It's quite helpful for when you're modelling, so if we put a face frame in here, we can untag the walls and we can see into the back of the face frame without the walls being in the way. So it's quite a handy tool to get used to using early on in SketchUp. So we've got our reference cross there. We need to sort this outer level ceiling out. So on the left hand side we had 1442, and on the right we had 1424, and then we had 180mm of cornice. So the room is actually out of level by 18mm across this section where the wardrobe is. So in order to dip that down, what I could do is double click into that wall section, grab this bit of the wall, and then try moving it vertically downhill. But you see it makes a bit of a mess of all the top of the walls there, because it's trying to move these three lines vertically downhill, and it's got a bevel across from these points here which are all fixed. So what I like to do is just create a intersection point at the point at which I want it to bevel at, and I can just grab that section there, get my cursor in line with it, press the up arrow, and then bring it down 18. And then we've got our outer level ceiling nicely drawn on there. We can go up here, edit, and then delete guides, and it gets rid of all the mess on the screen. So the next thing we need to put in the model is that coving that runs around the top. Now I'm going to use the follow me tool. So the follow me tool is really cool. You just draw out the profile in 2D, then draw a line of where you want that profile to follow, and then you click follow me and sketch along the line, and it'll basically put that moulding along that line. Now if we do that in this out of level ceiling here, what that does is it tries to mitre the corner of the coving down and around on the angle, and it actually throws the underside of it out at an angle, or if you use your line around the underside, it throws the top of it out at an angle. So I like to draw everything like this out nice and square, then adjust it like we did here with that move tool. So I'd select this portion and move it downhill. So let's start by grabbing a section of cornice. Now here's one that I've pre-drawn before and is the right size. I actually drew this with everything else and filmed all of this process of drawing this out, but I forgot to turn the microphone on, so it kind of ruined that video. So this is the second time I'm drawing this out for you lot. So there's my cornice section, just drawn. If you draw a square and then draw your profile in that 2D square, make sure it doesn't come out the model on the wrong axis. You can't go far wrong. And then just grab that and position it on a point at which the cornice is going to be running. So if you're going to go full 360 around a perimeter of a room, put it in the middle of a wall and then go round like that. You can't start in the corner because your profile won't meet up when you get to the end. So once you've done that, we've got to ascertain where that cornice is coming off this wall. So we took that measurement in one of these other drawings. So we're 632 from the back wall to the face of the face frame. So from this back wall, 632. I can now draw a line around my model on a flat plane. So I know the bottom of the model is still flat, so I can go to that line there, that line there, oh, to there, and there. And because that is a group, then walls are group, I can select that line on its own and then move it up to that cornice, and I can work on that without interfering with that group that is the walls. Then once I've got that, use the follow me tool and just use that to follow the line that we've just drawn and make sure that it follows that around in the path that we want. And we've got ourselves a bit of coving. We can select all that and soften the edges to try and get rid of some of these lines. It's so on the Mac we've got a soften smooth section up here, so we can adjust how much of them lines we actually want to see. So I'm just going to do it until we get rid of them dark heavy lines, but we can still see the detail of that coving on this soften smooth edges section at the top. So that's the coving. Again, with everything we draw, delete the guides, triple click what we've just drawn so it selects every part of it, double click will select, one click selects that face that we're touching, double click is the faces and the face and the edges appropriate to that face, and then a triple click is everything that is attached to that piece. We can then, once we've triple clicked, make it a group, give it a tag, coving, and tag it under coving. Now to get over this out of level part here, which is quite an important detail, because I really wanted to show the customer how that 20mm or 80mm out of level could be portrayed against the wardrobe, whether we have a thin fillet of timber there or a thicker one. So I really wanted to show that in the model. I'm going to double click to get into my coving and grab that right hand side, select the top plane of it, press the up arrow to pin it to an axis. I'm just going to move it down so it corresponds to the wall the same as I did earlier. And all that's done is distort the top of it, which is the bit that you don't see from where we're going to take all the sort of photo shots, as so to speak. The top of it is not going to be seen, so in my opinion that's the best way to deal with something like that out of level coving. So before we move on to modelling the wardrobe, I think I'll just touch on the scenes tab. So scenes are quite handy for switching between different viewpoints within your model, which is both handy when you're drawing the model and when you're trying to show it off later in layout or produce viewpoints for a customer to see the design that you've come up with. So we could create a scene from this viewpoint here where we're stood back from the model looking at it, and we're in a perspective viewpoint here in the camera part. So parallel projection is where you look at it as an exact line. It's sort of not as the eye sees it. That is a parallel projection. So if we go horizontal with that model, both the top there and the bottom sit perfectly horizontal to the front of the screen, which is kind of not realistic, but it's great for cross-sectional drawing. So in the perspective mode there, create a scene, and that's scene 1. We can name that if we want. Main view. Oh. Then we could perhaps go to that perspective view, parallel projection viewpoint, and click the standard view of the front. This is the front of our wardrobe, and create another scene there, which would be parallel front. We could do the same thing with a section plane, so select section plane, put that through our model there. We can then go to the side viewport. Where is it? That one. We could select to zoom over that section, and then we could create a viewpoint on here, so a scene here. We could call that cross section. So then if we click these points at the top, we can then quickly switch between them, and the one that you click last is the kind of setting that you go into and then you remain in until you click another viewpoint or you change a setting in the side here. So on the styles tab, we could perhaps change the colour set to a default like this one. And if I updated that view and then clicked parallel front, it goes back to the other style, and then main view switches back to that one. So it's quite handy if you want to see things in different views and switch between them easily, but you've got to remember that it will change it. So if you update a setting on this one and you want it to travel across all of them, that can be quite frustrating, so you want to get that right as you're setting them. We'll go back to keep it all in the same. And the other thing that might be worth just touching on, it's not really relevant for this video, but it's just to make sure that when you select one of your groups that you've modelled, that in the entity info up here it says solid or solid group. And that's really important later on for dynamic components, and if you get the Pro version, it's really easy to use them if you get into it. But a dynamic component, basically you can do some really weird and wonderful stuff with. If we say we had a shape that was very random like this, and we make that a group and it's a solid, we could take that into our walls here and select the two and click trim, and we've imprinted that shape into our walls. So something like this out of level cornice here, we could build a square face frame. If the walls were out of level as well, we could build our face frame, put it in the position that we wanted, and then hit that trim button, and it will actually trim the face frame to suit the walls really easily. So that's a really handy tool, use that all the time. If I'm doing a detailed model of a joint or a window, it's really handy to, once you've built your tenon, to put it into the other component, and it will make all the counterpart mortise in the other component just instantly for you. So that's sort of touching into that, sort of dipping your toe into what solid groups and the solid tools can do. And like I say, it's not a part of Sketchup Make. You can do pretty much all of this except for the tags and the solid tools in the free version of Google SketchUp, which is Sketchup Make. And I'd recommend you download the desktop version of it, not use the web-based version which is on your web browser. You'll be able to find somewhere a download for SketchUp Make 2017. So we might want to, for a visual effect for this model, I'm not going to draw the wardrobe in this video, that's going to be the next one. We might want to just add the floors in as well, so we can draw a rectangle there for the floor, make that a group, and we can do the same for the ceiling. We can actually grab the floor and then press on my computer Option, I think it's Control on the Windows, and it actually, when you press the move tool, instead of just moving the item, you can toggle between move it or create a duplicate and move it, which is quite handy. I've just pressed the up arrow there to toggle it on that blue axis, then aligned it with the top, so that's my ceiling level. But the thing I learnt the other day is if I click now, then press times and then a number, say 15, and then enter, will actually do that command 15 times for me. That is really handy when you're drawing out a lot of glazing bars or studs or something like that for a project. You can just do that times 15 and it's done it for you, whereas before I was sort of doing one, then selecting that one, and then selecting the one below it and pressing the option button and then moving it, and then perhaps I'd select two and do the same thing and do it that way, which is fairly fast, but it's not as fast as doing that times after your command. And that's kind of what SketchUp is all about, in that you'll constantly be learning little tips and tricks to make it faster and easier to be able to get to the end goal of what you want. We can add a bit of colour to them, so if we select that group, press B, it brings up your colour. It's a little bit different on Windows. Press that, and then we could make that a wooden floor. So you can download all sorts of weird and wonderful textures and either make your own and input them into Sketchup, but this is a standard sort of selection tab. I think I've not done it on the Mac. I've only just transferred from Windows to Mac. If you right click before on Windows, you could edit the textures and sort of rotate that floorboarding to run the other way, increase and decrease its size and stuff like that. So I had to reteach myself there how to adjust the texture, but you can only adjust the texture position if you do it within the group. So there's two ways of texturing an item, which I've fallen down on a couple of times in the past. So like the ceiling here is a group, and you can, outside of the group, drop a texture onto that group, which you make everything in the group that is currently a default material, or the same material as you drop that texture on, it will colour it all the same as that colour, which is quite handy if you want to do that. But you then cannot edit that texture, so there's no texture edit option. So if you want to be able to orientate the texture in a certain way, you need to go into the group, then paint the item with the texture. Then if you right click, you can texture position, and you got all sorts of tools there in order to be able to orientate it. So like this one here, we can rotate the floor through 90 degrees, and we can also make the floorboards a little bit bigger. If we drag that, we can make them bigger, and we get a more accurate floorboard there. So there's lots of stuff to fall down on with groups, and it's just, you got to get used to working with the model. So an example of where you might fall down is if you made these walls, the skirting, the ceiling and the floor all as one group. So I'll get rid of my reference cross. Let's make a lot of that one group. So we can have a group within a group. So we've got one group for all of that. Go into that group, and then we've got our individual groups of the different things. So out of it all, if I use a texture, say brick, and I put a brick wall and drag it onto that group, it'll do everything with that same default material with that texture move. So if I then go into the model and I press a different brick onto the actual walls, I can change that. But then if I go back out of it and press that onto that brick there, it will only change the ones that are still the same colour, and I can't then paint that brick wall from the outside of the model. I'm going to have to go back into the model to paint that wall itself. So if you get frustrated with, you've painted something in a group and you didn't want it to be part of a different colour, you wanted it to be painted with the whole group, then I found the easiest way to get around that is to use the default material tool at the bottom here, and just go back in, and anything that won't paint back to default, select it and keep going into it until it goes back to default. So the walls there, keep double tapping in until I get them to default, and then you can just basically start again and paint everything back to the same colour. So it can get a bit confusing, but that default material tool is really, really handy. So going back to the floors here, and paint my floor with the wood boards. And choose a nice light grey for our walls, and our coving and our ceiling can then be white. Back to the main view, so we might want to adjust the main view. If we've not made a complete room, we might want to adjust that main room view so that it excludes this stuff on the side, so it doesn't look like you are in a model, it looks realistic. Or we can adjust the field of view, so in the camera tools, field of view, we're set on a standard 35 degrees. We could change that to something I quite like 60 degrees. You sort of get quite a wide angle lens of your projects, and it looks more realistic to the human eye, I think. And if you want to be really accurate with a final camera position, this position camera tool will actually position the lens of the camera at head height off the floor. I think you can set that height as well in the settings or in the preferences, and then if you use the walk tool you can walk around in that direction. So your cross is sort of like stand still. If you do that backwards, you look around and you can walk around your model looking at sort of head height. I find the position camera tool, when you've modelled a really small room like a pantry or a utility room, that's really handy. So you can just get this sort of main camera to nip into within the walls, position camera over in this corner, say there, and then just rotate round and you get sort of as far in the corner as you can get without the camera popping through the wall like that, which is really annoying when you're trying to position your camera. So zoom previous, we go back to that position, and it's a really good tip for positioning the camera nice and accurately and quickly. So I hope you've found this pretty interesting. It's probably a slightly more advanced SketchUp tutorial. It's not really a tutorial, but it's more of a showcasing my method for taking them measured drawings and producing an accurate version of it on SketchUp that I can now model from. So in the next video I'll be drawing the wardrobe out and fitting it within them walls so that I can show the customer the options on how it's going to look and make any changes nice and quickly.